Okay, so the 23rd entry into the MCU in chronological order takes us to the finale of the first three phases of the MCU and pretty much the conclusion of the Infinity Saga with Avengers Endgame. So let's waste no time. Let's get right into it. Overall, I'm a big fan of Avengers Endgame. I think this movie is the perfect conclusion to the Infinity Saga. It is the perfect conclusion to the first three phases of the MCU, and it gives major characters the send-off that every single one of them mostly deserve. Now, do I think Endgame is a perfect movie? Let's just say this. Now that I've taken off the fanboy goggles and now that I've seen this movie multiple times, no, this is not a perfect movie by any sense of the imagination, but that doesn't take away from the fun of this movie, and that certainly doesn't take away from the emotional impact that this movie punches, especially when you get to the epilogue, in which, yeah, if you follow this franchise for 11 years up to 2019, it's an emotional gut punch. It sets up stuff for the future, but it concludes the two big character arc, but it concludes the two big stories that pretty much began in phase one and nicely wrapped up in this. Of course, now how they handled it in phase four, that's all up on how you want to handle it. I think phase four was absolutely dreadful, with maybe a few little good highlights here and there. But without any further ado, let's talk about Avengers. Okay, so the first 20 to 30 minutes of this movie basically takes place both concurrently and 3 weeks post the events of Infinity War. The movie opens up with Hawkeye, and we see what Hawkeye is doing post-Civil War. He's on house arrest, hanging out with his family. They're having a picnic. He's teaching his daughter how to do archery. Then, all of a sudden, poof, snap happens. His family disappear. Hawkeye's in disarray. This is actually very important because this sets up Hawkeye's character arc, in which he transforms himself into a vigilante killer known as the Ronin, who pretty much hunts down and kills criminals all around the world, a la in the same vein as the Punisher. Now, after we get done with this opening prologue, we skip ahead to Nebula and Stark on Peter Quill's ship, post the events of the War on Titan. Of course, they're defeated. They're slowly dying because they're losing oxygen. They're running out of food. Eventually, they're saved by Captain Marvel, who makes one of, let's say, a handful of appearances. Thank God, who brings them down to Earth. Now, this whole thing is basically the surviving Avengers and Guardians teaming up together to try and locate where Thanos is. Like I said, this movie takes place 3 weeks after the events of Infinity War. So since that time frame, they've been looking all over space and the galaxy for Thanos until they finally find out where he is, thanks to Nebula. Now, Nebula has remembered that once Thanos got the Infinity Gauntlet and did what he wanted to do, his whole thing was to retire and to go to the Gardens. And that's where they locate Thanos. And of course, this Thanos, this is a Thanos who's pretty much living the retired life. He's battle scarred in his way. He's done what he wanted to do. Now he's living his simple life until he withers away. Now, of course, the Avengers don't care about Thanos' retirement plan because, let's face it, this man just slaughtered 50% of the entire universe, and everything is now in ruins. So the Avengers, they basically want the Infinity Gauntlet. They want the stones to try and reverse what he did. However, Thanos, being the smart villain that he is, once he went to the Gardens, he used the stones to destroy the stones, pretty much making whatever he did irreversible. Of course, this leads to Thor chopping off Thanos' head in a nice callback to Infinity War, but it's an empty victory for Thor. His friends and his colleagues are dead, and he just got himself an empty win. But I do like the line that he tells Thanos after this time I went for the head. But this sets up Thor's character arc, in which he goes into a deep depression. He killed Thanos, but it didn't mean nothing in the end. It was an empty win. Now, how they handled Thor's character is entirely up into interpretation, how you wanna interpret it. For the most part, I liked it. And for the most part, I didn't care for it. And I'll illustrate that when I talk about it. But let me just get the overview. Let me just get this little overview out of the way first. So once that happens, we jump 5 years into the future. Everything is in ruins. Everything is done. The Avengers have all but given up on trying to find on trying to figure out how to find their friends and stuff like that. But then, thanks to a stupid rat, Scott Lang returns from the quantum realm And this sets up hope that there is a way to bring everyone back. This, of course, sets up the idea of time travel, and this is where the time heist aspect of the film comes in together, in which the few remaining Avengers and Guardians come together to do this time heist, where they got to go to 3 separate points in time to collect all the Infinity Stones in order to bring everyone back. Ant-Man, Cap, and Iron Man, they go to 2012 during the events of the first Avengers movie. Hawkeye and Black Widow go to Vormir to get the Soul Stone, while Nebula and Rhodey go to Morag to get the Power Stone from Peter Quill. Now, now during the mission, stuff happens. You know, during the battle of 2012, and what I do like about the middle portion of the movie, which is the whole time heist, is seeing things from a different perspective. I forgot to mention, Hulk also goes to 2012, is seeing things from a different perspective. And now that we have the knowledge of the greater MCU, you know, it's fun seeing seeing how certain events play out. Like in 2012, we actually see the Ancient One, played by Tilda Swinton, fighting off the Chitauri while protecting the Sanctum Sanctorum. You know, I like stuff like that. You know, we also see Hydra Shield collect the scepter. Of course, this before we knew that Hydra was Shield. We get the return of Brock Rumlow. We get the return of Alexander Pierce. We have a nice little moment of Robert Redford and Downey having a back and forth conversation about who should get Loki and who shouldn't get Loki. You know, I like seeing stuff like this. Of course, we get an entertaining mirror match between between two Captain Americas. I don't care for the whole running joke of America's ass. I thought that shit was not funny whatsoever. But the fight between the two Caps was really good and was very entertaining, and I like that a lot. And of course, the Ancient One and Bruce Banner have nice bantering about how if you take the stones from their respective timelines, it can cause different branches and alternate realities and stuff like that. Like this movie's rules for explaining the time travel is very convoluted and very confusing. But the general gist of it, they use reference points like Back to the Future and Terminator and stuff like that to try and make it all make sense. So I guess that's okay for the most part. And then you have the Ancient One, who is also putting in her little thing as well. Like if you take an Infinity Stone out of their respective timeline, it can cause different realities to branch out into different timelines, which can cause negative ripple effects. But of course, Bruce has the idea that, well, if we take these stones and use them, and then we can put them back into their respective timelines, it'll be like nothing ever happened. So yeah, like the rules are very, very confusing as to how they make time travel work, and for the most part, they try to make it make sense. But again, it's very convoluted, and you gotta really suspend your disbelief in a way. But that is what it is. Like I do overall like the bantering between Banner, no pun intended, and the Ancient One. It was nice seeing Tilda Swinton. It was nice how I like how the Ancient One actually knows the future and knows that Doctor Strange is going to be coming to her one day. So I like that sort of stuff. That's a nice little nod, and it's a nice little Easter egg. Now, of course, Iron Man and Ant-Man failed to gain the Tesseract, mainly because this takes place in 2012 after the battle with Loki. So Hulk, very upset that he has to take the stairs, accidentally bumps into Stark, which causes him to drop the Tesseract, in which the 2012 version of Loki takes it and disappears into space. That, of course, sets up the god-awful Loki show, which completely just renders the entire MCU completely irrelevant. And if you actually watch the Loki show, that show is horrible. It pretty much took away the importance and the value of the Infinity Stones, and it basically made every single death and event that took place in a movie and took place in the entire Infinity Saga absolutely worthless. Because the show made a joke out of the Infinity Stones by saying, "Oh yeah, we have tons of those. We use them as paperweights." Yeah, Phase 4 of the MCU, I do not like it. It did everything. Phase 4 of the MCU did everything that it could to undercut what came before it and make a joke out of everything. It pretty much made a joke out of Tony's sacrifice when you get to the end of this movie. But I don't want to talk about Loki. I already reviewed Loki. If you want to check it out, there's a playlist on the channel, and you can get all my thoughts on how I think the Loki show is absolutely god-awful. But yeah, Loki takes the Space Stone and disappears to do his own little stupid adventure in his really bad TV show. Of course, this gives Tony the idea to, okay, we messed up this one, but there's still one more chance we can go. So they end up going to 1970 in order to get the Tesseract and also some Pym particles, because as Scott Lang explained early on in the movie, the only Pym particles that they have are the Pym particles that he possesses, because Hank Pym has been snapped away. And the only person who knows how to create those Pym particles is Hank Pym himself. So by going to 1970, they're going to a time place where Hank Pym's still alive and a part of S.H.I.E.L.D., and you have the Tesseract, which is still which is still inside S.H.I.E.L.D. as well. And I actually really like this portion of the movie because Tony Stark gets to have a reunion with his father, and they have a nice little conversation, which acts as a nice epilogue to Tony's relationship with his father Howard, where they finally understand one another. Of course, it was done in a way where Howard didn't flat out was not overly. Of course, they did it in a way where they hid the fact that Tony was Howard's son, but the way Downey and John Slattery played it was very nice and very touching. I really enjoyed it a lot. We also have Steve Rogers getting a nice little moment with Peggy just by seeing her through a window, and you can still feel the emotion. Like, Peggy was the life of this man's life. He misses the hell out of this woman. And I like the 1970s portion of the movie, and of course that's where they get the Space Stone to go back to the present. Now that that's out of the way, we have the other missions that are going through. 3 other missions, I should say. Now we have Rocket and Thor going to 2013 Asgard to get the Reality Stone. This was right before Asgard was attacked by the Dark Elves. And this is where a lot of the criticisms for Thor comes from. So basically, once Thor kills Thanos, he pretty much becomes a recluse on New Asgard and turns into a fat alcoholic who just stays in his cabin, drinks beer, and plays video games with Korg and Mike. And he's pretty much lost all his ambition. He's pretty much lost all his will. And I like seeing broken Thor. I'm not a huge fan of him of him being like this fat, out of shape tub of blub. But I don't hate the fact that Thor is an alcoholic who is pretty much trying to hide his feelings within booze. I think they got maybe a little too comical with it. But I do like how when he and Rocket go to Asgard to get the reality stone from that's inside Jane. If you watch Thor: The Dark World, he does have a nice moment with his mom Frigga, which pretty much regains his confidence. And the fact that he's still worthy to hold the hammer also is a nice confidence booster as well. So even though I think Fat Thor has his moments where it can be both cringe and decent all at the same time, it is mostly well handled. And to the Russos brothers' credit, They don't overdo the comedy of Fat Thor, if that makes any sense. He does have some cringy moments here and there. There's this one scene where Rocket's trying to give him a pep talk, and you think it's gonna get through to Thor, but he's like, oh no, I gotta go, I can't do this. That could be a little hit and miss for me, but I do like how it's the conversation with his mom that gives him his fire back, that gives him his confidence back, and the fact that he's still worthy enough to hold Mjolnir. That's also a nice confidence booster. So yeah, of course, I also love the bantering between Thor and Rocket. I think Bradley Cooper is grossly underrated as the character of Rocket. He's my favorite Guardian. He and Thor have great comedic chemistry with one another, and that's and of course that extends from their bantering in Infinity War and how Thor and Rocket pretty much had a nice allyship going on there, and that's expanded upon further in this, which I do not hate. I like it a lot. So yeah, that's that. And then you get the other 2 missions. You have War Machine and Nebula going to Morad to get the Power Stone. And I like seeing the opening of Guardians being seen from the perspectives of Nebula and Rhodey. They pretty much look at Quill, and Rhodey says it best. So this guy's basically an idiot, right? And Nebula's like, But what's also good with the 2014 section that it does take place during the Guardians movie. So we see the return of Gamora, and we see a younger version of Thanos who is different from his Infinity War counterpart. Now, this is where my biggest complaint comes from, because the Endgame version of Thanos is more of the war tyrant version of Thanos. And I am of 2 sides about this. One side, I thought Josh Brolin continues to put on a great performance as the character of Thanos. And he does have some great lines in this movie. My biggest complaint is that this Thanos does not have the development that he went through in Infinity War. So when you're trying to watch when you try to watch Infinity War and Endgame back to back, it feels different because the Thanos that I liked was killed off in the first 20 minutes of the movie, and now I'm stuck with a less interesting, younger version of the character, who is more or less all about war and not about making the sacrifices that there is to win his war. He's just bloodthirsty and wants the Infinity Stones, and there's not really much to this version of Thanos. That is my biggest gripe. He's still a threat, but the intrigue of his character is gone, and I don't like that at all. Again, Josh Brolin acts his ass off like he always does, and he has some killer lines and some killer bantering with a lot of the characters, and I do love the final battle where Resurrected Scarlet Witch confronts Thanos, and Thanos is like, "I don't even know who you are." That's awesome stuff. I love those. I love that line. And yeah, it can only work with this version of Thanos. So that's why I said it's a mixed bag. That's why I said that the Endgame version of Thanos is a very, very mixed bag for me. The same thing with Gamora. Like, we killed off Gamora. Now we're stuck with a version from her from Guardians where she doesn't go through the development that she went through. But at the same time, she kind of sort of does, mostly with her sister Nebula and them going against Thanos. So that is what it is. Like I said, I'm two sides of this. I wouldn't have resurrected Gamora. I would have kept her dead because her death had a really emotional impact. I think Endgame did a lot of good things, and then it retconned a lot of other things as well, because I don't find a resurrected Gamora to be interesting, where she still maintains where she is at the beginning of Guardians, and all her development from Guardians 2 is completely just washed away. I'm not a fan of that whatsoever. Didn't like that. Now, I didn't see Guardians 3, so I don't know what really happens with Gamora in that movie, so I'm going to let it slide until I actually watch that movie. But just from my first experience when I first saw Endgame, yeah, not a fan of resurrecting Gamora to bring her back. and I'm very split down the middle on the Endgame version of Thanos. But to make a long story short, so we can move on to the next section, we have the 2014 version of Thanos, who is bloodthirsty, wants to hunt down the Infinity Stones. Since there's two nebulas, the nebula of the past now has the memory of the nebula of the future, and Thanos uses that to his advantage to find all the stones, so that way he can do what he wants to do. So you have all that going for you. And then we have the stuff with Black Widow and Hawkeye on the trip to Volmir. Now, of course, as we all know, in order to get the Soul Stone, you got to sacrifice the one you love. Has to be sacrificed. Now, of course, we also got the return of the Red Skull, who does his little cameo. Blah 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 blah. And this is what leads to one of the big emotional depths of this movie, which is Black Widow sacrificing herself in order to get the Soul Stone. Of course, Clint wanted to do it himself because he feels like he's gone way too far as a character of Ronin, and he feels like him making the sacrifices is a way for him to redeem himself. While all the while, Black Widow, knowing that Clint has a family and knowing that doing this can get Clint's family back, she pretty much takes that away from him. And listen, I love how this scene is played out because it's Hawkeye and it's Black Widow. These two have always had like a brother-sister camaraderie ever since that first Avengers movie going forward. So when Black Widow makes that ultimate sacrifice, it works for me. And Jeremy Renner's performance when Widow does it, really you can feel the emotional dread going through him, and I love it, and I really liked it a lot. Like, Jeremy Renner did a decent performance at showing just the heartbreak of losing Natasha. I think the movie tried to replicate that awesome moment with Gamora with Thanos, which I think Thanos sacrificing Gamora is the better version of the Soul Stone section of these two movies. Mainly because you can see the dread and anguish that Thanos went through when doing that. He's basically sacrificing the daughter that he legitimately loves in order to obtain his goal. Now this one, you still get that emotional beat, and it's Black Widow who is a major character in this movie and who is one of the more popular Avengers, and for rightly so, because Scarlett Johansson is very, very good in the role, and I like her in this movie, and I like her in all her movies, even though I don't like her solo movie, at least she was good in it. But yeah, Widow gets sacrificed, and boom, the Soul Stone is now all yours. So now they go back to the present time. They use a nanonite Iron Man suit thing to get the stones all in place. of course, since the stones have heavy gamma radiation, the only person who's logical to do this is the Incredible Hulk, Bruce Banner, who's now in Smart Hulk form. So, before I get into the last section of the movie, so in Thor Ragnarok, Bruce and Hulk were pretty much having their differences, where Bruce was in Hulk form for 2 years and he felt like he had no control. Then you get to Infinity War, where Banner had zero control over the Hulk because the Hulk refused to come out. And basically Banner now has to find a balance between not only himself and the Hulk, but just everything else in between. Hence how we get Smart Hulk. He pretty much took the best of both worlds and combined it together. So now when Banner goes into Hulk form, he keeps his intellect and now has full control. And of course they also go to Banner to go for the time travel stuff before they go to Tony, who is now living with Pepper and his new daughter Morgan, and Tony's the one who actually figures out how to make time travel work. So yeah, that stuff but was also really cool and really nice as well. And like I mentioned before, I do like and like I mentioned before, seeing Paul Rudd interact with RDJ, I can watch these two act off one another all the live long day. And I really did wish we got an Iron Man Ant-Man team-up movie, because that could have been so much fun. But I do like the bantering that happens between the two characters now and then. And of course, you know, Scott Lang is still a Captain America fanboy, which I love as well. But I digress. So let's wrap this up because we're almost done. So the Infinity Stones, they're all come together, and the Hulk is the only one who can handle the gamma radiation since he was created from gamma radiation. He does the snap. Now, first, everything happens little by little. You know, Hawkeye gets a call from his wife Laura, who has now been resurrected. But as this is going on, Thanos leads his invasion on Earth for the final battle. And the entire final battle of this movie goes on for almost an hour, and it is epic. Pretty much everything you want in a world-ending battle to save everything. This final battle has everything. It has all the callbacks you want. It has all the little nods and references all you want. Everything you want in a final battle is in this movie. Thanos has nice little mini fights with nearly every single Avenger. He has a nice little mini fight with Cap in which he nearly kills him. He has a nice rumble with Tony Stark in which he nearly kills him as well. You know, like you really see and this is where the positive aspect of 2014 Thanos comes together, because this is the more battle-scarred and battle-driven Thanos. So he's more ruthless, he's more aggressive, and I really like seeing this version of, and again, I would have preferred if it was the Infinity War Thanos as opposed to this Thanos, because I think that Thanos, with all the anguish that he had within inside of him, now doing this final battle, you would have saw that same rage and aggression as well, because now he's fighting the Avengers to make sure they don't reverse what he did. I think that could have had much more emotional impact, in my opinion. But yeah, the final battle is fantastic. You get nice little callbacks. You know, we have Thor, we have Captain America picking up Mjolnir, which was hinted at Age of Ultron that he was the one he's the one that could be worthy to wield the hammer, and that gets paid off nicely with this. And I love Thor's reaction to it, where he's like, "I knew it." Great stuff, like really great stuff. And of course, we have all the other Avengers getting resurrected, with Sam saying on your left, beautiful callback to Winter Soldier. And then we have all the Avengers lined up. Everyone is back. And Captain America finally gets to say, "Avengers assemble," as the battle cry to take on Thanos and his forces. And this whole rumble is fantastic. I love it a lot. Yeah, you know, Captain Marvel makes an appearance here and there. The best part of Captain Marvel showing up is Thanos taking the Power Stone and knocking that bitch into next year. That was great stuff. We get the resurrection of Spider-Man, and he has a nice little reunion with Tony Stark. I love that scene very, very much. I love that scene very, very much, because Tony Stark's motivation to wanting to do this was because of the guilt he had for Peter Parker dying, and that gets resolved once Peter gets resurrected, and they finally embrace. Beautiful moment. A father reuniting with his son. I love that stuff. You have the She-Vengers scene, which was, I'm not going to lie, you can tell that it was really, really forced in and didn't seem natural at all. But luckily, we didn't have a whole section of them fighting Thanos together, thankfully. I'm not against it. It was so forced and so cringy. But yeah, the She-Vengers thing is whatever. Yeah, of course, the She-Vengers has Rescue, who is Pepper Potts in her own Iron Man suit. This was established early on that Stark was making Pepper her own suit. So that gets paid off nicely at the end. But I do like when Rescue and Iron Man team up together to take on some of Thanos' goons. That was actually a nice, cool moment. So I actually do like that a lot. Of course, we got the resurrection of Doctor Strange now. Now this, and of course, the conversation between Stark and Strange in this movie basically plays off Infinity War, in which pretty much Avengers Endgame is basically what Doctor Strange's plan was. And of course, Tony, does a nice callback where he says, "Is one of 14 million?" And Strange says, "If I tell you what happens, it may not happen." So he keeps his mouth shut. And of course, we all know what happened. So as the war is going down, getting close to the end, we're down to Thanos. We're down to Iron Man. Thanos is about to do the snap, where he has that great line where he says, "I am inevitable." And then Stark, who has all the gems, he says, "And I am Iron Man." Beautiful callback to that first movie. It ends where it began. Stark does the snap. Thanos and his forces are completely obliterated. However, Tony dies. Tony sacrifices himself to save the universe. And this is also a beautiful callback to that first Avengers movie where Cap and Stark have this conversation where Cap tells Tony, like, you're not willing to lay on a grenade, you're not willing to lay down and let the other guy crawl over you. This is that character arc coming to a close as well, because Tony, he laid down on the grenade to let everyone else crawl all over him so that way they can live. Beautiful callback. And the scene of Tony just having his last moments with Pepper and Rhodey and Spider-Man, so emotional. He's with the three people who essentially loved him the most: his wife, his best friend, and his surrogate son, his adopted son, Peter. And of course, you get to the whole funeral scene in which everyone is resurrected, in which everyone comes back. Beautifully done. If this funeral scene does not bring a tear to your eye, then there's something wrong with you, because this is 10 years culminating all into one. So the beautiful scene, the funeral scene, was very well handled and very nicely done. And then we get to the epilogue where we see Thor joining up with the Guardians of the Galaxy to go on their own nice adventures, where Thor once again is trying to find himself. Thor's always finding himself. In one movie, he tries to find himself. In Avengers Endgame, he tries to find himself as Fat Thor, and then at the end, he tries to find himself with the Guardians of the Galaxy. Hence the running joke of every time you see Thor on screen, he's constantly trying to find himself. But I do like the idea of Thor teaming up with the Guardians of the Galaxy. Of course, when you get to Thor: Love and Thunder, that just goes absolutely nowhere, and I'll talk about that when I talk about that. But I like the overall setup. And I still like the bickering between Peter Quill and Thor. And I also like the moment of Peter Quill seeing 2014 Gamora, and of course this version of Gamora just not being interested in Peter Quill at all, gives him 2 trips to Dick Kick City. Poor Peter. Of course, this sets up Peter's character arc to try and find Gamora. Now again, I haven't seen Guardians 3 yet. I'll talk about that when I talk about that. But this pretty much sets it up. I'm trying to think what else. I'm trying to think of another moment that took place before I get to the stuff with Sam and Cap and Bucky. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, you have Thor team up with the Guardians of the Galaxy, and then you have the end, which is, pretty much Steve Rogers returning all the stones back to their proper place, but he chose to stay behind and finally live his life, which is also a nice callback. Steve finally got to live his life the way he should have lived his life, and he passes over. And of course, along with Bucky, they pass the shield over to Sam Wilson, the Falcon. And of course, this sets up the now very, very mediocre and just disappointing Falcon and Winter Soldier show, which I was most looking forward to. But after watching it, I just was completely disinterested in it, which was a shame, because the setup for that was nicely done with this, with pretty much Steve Rogers passing off the shield to Sam, because in Steve's mind, Sam's the right guy for the job, and and more or less he's the future. And I like how you have Bucky, who gives that also slight approval as well with Steve. Like, Bucky and Steve came to this decision together. Of course, when you watch the show, they try to make it, they try to retcon to be white guilt, which I thought was completely and utterly stupid and goes against the character of Steve Rogers. But in essence, I like the initial setup, and of course, I like how Sam's reluctant at first because he feels like it doesn't belong to him. But Steve assures him like, no, you're the right guy for the job. And then the movie ends with Cap finally getting his dance with Peggy, paying off that long journey. Yes, Avengers Endgame is still a fun and great movie and beautiful conclusion to the Infinity Saga, where the main characters pretty much get their proper send-off. Black Widow makes the ultimate sacrifice. Tony Stark makes the ultimate sacrifice. Captain America retires and finally gets a chance to live out his life, and now he's old man Steve Rogers. While the Endgame did a fantastic job at concluding the Infinity Saga, it also put pieces in place for what's to go next. Spider-Man is now resurrected. He gets reunited with his friends. Of course, this sets up Far From Home and what happens with that. So yeah, all the pieces get put in place. The first three phases get wrapped up nicely, and the initial setups for Phase 4 were interesting. But once you actually watch Phase 4, it is what it is. So yeah, just looking at Avengers Endgame as a standalone movie and as a conclusion to the Infinity Saga, this movie is a solid 8 out of 10. It's not as strong as Infinity War, but it's still a great movie. It still does everything you wanted to do, and like I said, it wraps up the original Avengers team in a proper send-off. So yes, 8 out of 10 for Avengers Endgame. Let me know your thoughts in the comment sections down below. Like the video and subscribe, and I'll check you back next time for more.